to our Schools Division Superintendent, Dr. Edelberto L. Oplenaria, to our newly installed Assistant Schools Division Superintendent, Dr. Rosemary P. Masesser, to our SGOD team headed by SGOD Chief Dr. Maria Carmela P. Ablin, to our CID team headed by our CID Chief Dr. Arlene C. Carbonera, to our very supportive school heads, active teachers, ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant day. Today, I will be talking about sampling methods. So, sampling methods are required for us to select samples from the population. So before that, we are going to have our objectives. The first objective is that at the end of the session, we need to differentiate random and non-random sampling procedure in selecting participants for action research. Next, we need to describe different random and non-random sampling methods. And next is we need to determine appropriate sampling procedure and sample size for different research questions. So we have here, before we are going to talk about samples, we need to talk about population. So in this slide, we can see that population, that the sample is under the accessible population. The accessible population is under the target population, and the target population is under the entire population. So what do these terms mean? So population is a very large group of individuals that is the main focus of the research. While target population is the entire group of individuals you can apply your action research to solve problems. For example, since we are teachers or educators, our population is the learners of the Department of Education. When we talk about target population, what particular kind of learners we are going to use, or shall we say we are going to apply our action research? So an example of this are the non-readers. We want to solve the reading problem of the non-readers. Therefore, the non-readers of the Department of Education is our target population. Next is accessible population. Accessible population refers to the population within the accessible reach of the researcher. For example, since our target population are the learners who are classified as non-readers in the Department of Education, our accessible population here are the non-readers of the Division of Lanao del Norte, because they are within our reach. We can reach them because they are reachable through proximity and also by authority, because we can directly go to them by asking permission from our Schools Division Superintendent. And from the accessible population, we can now get our samples. So the samples are the participants of the study. So diri na ta mo pili og who are we going to subject our intervention, or who are going to be exposed to our intervention from the sample. So gikan siya sa accessible population. Once again, the sample is under the accessible population. So we can get the samples from the accessible population. We can get the accessible population from the target population. and we can get the target population from the entire population. So this is the diagram of that. So we need to identify first the population before getting the samples. Now, the problem is, if we have the population, why do we need to sample? Why do we need sampling procedure? We can directly go to the population and then conduct the study, right? Well, that is almost impossible and impractical because the entire population is composed of a lot of individuals within our reach. Some of them are within our reach and some of them are not within our reach. That's why we need to sample. And also, it is impractical in the sense that we have what we call the term saturation in research. What do we mean by saturation? Saturation means that the data, or shall we say the responses of the respondents or the participants, are just redundant. You do not need to gather more data because all of their answers to your questionnaire are already the same again and again. And now we're going to talk about the types of sampling methods. So the first is random sampling, which means each member of the accessible population has an equal probability or chance of being chosen as participant. So dili siya limited. Anyone from the accessible population pwede siya mahimong participant sa study. On the other hand, non-random sampling has in non-random sampling, the members of the accessible population do not have equal chance of being selected. So in this case, we will establish the exclusion and inclusion criteria. So nganong sila ra? So we cannot include everyone from the accessible population as participant. So the kinds of random sampling are these four. First is simple random sampling. Second is stratified random sampling. Next is random clustered sampling. And last is two or multi-stage random sampling. So what is simple random sampling? From the name itself, it is a simple random sampling. All the names of accessible population are put in one list or in one box or jar. Actually, there are a lot of softwares for simple random sampling online applications. And then they are drawn one at a time. For example, so if you have a study of learners' attitudes towards mathematics, so you are just going to assign all the names of your learners with a particular number, which is then drawn one at a time. For example, you draw from the box or the jar number 20. Therefore, number 20 here is Helen. She is now identified as participant of your study. Then again, you are going to draw, and then you select. You've drawn number 27, which is Lucille. Therefore, Lucille is a participant of your study. Then to number 29, you've drawn again, and then you've drawn number 29. Therefore, Gils is a participant of your study because he is number 29. And in that way, you are just simply randomly selecting participants from a box or a jar or an online application. Actually, there are a lot of online applications for simple random sampling. You just search from the Google simple random sampling generator. So there are a lot of applications there or programs. Next is the stratified random sampling. The accessible population is divided into subgroups called strata, such as males and females. Random sample is taken from each group proportionately. So the proportion of this depends on the action researcher, provided that he can justify the proportion. For example, in this accessible population, we are going to use the master teachers. So ours, we wanted to conduct, and we want to conduct action research of the challenges in developing an action research of master teachers in Llano del Norte. Therefore, our accessible population are the master teachers. Now we want to have a proportionate number of participants from the master teacher positions. Therefore, the accessible population, from the accessible population, we need to have a strata of master teacher 1, master teacher 2, and master teacher 3. So, for example, as a researcher, I'm going to have the proportion from the master teacher 1, I need to get 40%, master teacher 2, 40%, and master teacher 3, 20%. Therefore, if I want to have 100 participants, I need to get 40 from the master teacher 1 group, 40 from the master teacher 2 group, and 20 from the master teacher 3 group. So those randomly selected participants from the strata are now my samples or participants of the study. So that's it. That's stratified random sampling. Next is random cluster sampling. In this sampling procedure, groups and not individuals are randomly selected. This assumption is that all members of selected groups have similar characteristics. This procedure is suitable when the population is very large or spread over a large geographical area. An example for this is a region-wide action research. You cannot individually select pupils. For example, you wanted to provide an intervention for the dropouts. Why are they dropping out? So you need to provide intervention for them. You cannot individually select pupils from the entire region because that would be impractically impossible, right? So what you're going to do is that you are going to select what particular schools division you are going to conduct your study. And then in that division, all of the dropouts, you are going to provide intervention. So that's the sense of random cluster sampling. In a wide geographical area, or shall I say, spread over, the participants are spread over in an over large geographical area, you just need to select the cluster rather than the individual. So in that sense. So last kind of random sampling is the two-stage or multi-stage random sampling. Clusters are randomly selected, and from them, individuals are then selected. For example, you wanted to study about the effects of social media to the performance of learners. So regional study, that's a regional study. So you cannot really to Miss Or one learner from Miss Or, get one learner from Miss Or, get one learner from Miss Ok, get one learner from Ozamis, get one learner from Llano del Norte. You cannot do that. However, you can decide what particular schools division you are going to go to conduct your study, and then from that schools division, you are going to select an individual pupil in order for you to select the participants. So in that sense, you are doing two-stage random sampling. So first, you are going to select first the cluster, and from that cluster, select the individual. That's the two-stage or multi-stage random sampling. So we are now on the non-probability sampling. We're in not all members of the accessible population have the chance to be selected as participants. So in purposive sampling, the participants are selected on the basis of certain characteristics that they might have, which are crucial to the purpose of the study. Therefore, the keyword here in purposive sampling is purpose. You have the purpose why they are selected as samples. So in establishing the purpose, you need to have the inclusion and exclusion criteria. Why them and why only them? Nganong sila o nganong sila raman? For example, if you want to conduct if you want to test the effectiveness of an intervention to non-readers, you do not need to include those pupils in the independent level or instructional level in the field array. All you have to do is to gather, or shall we say, select those students who are non-readers in your school. And that is purposive sampling. Because you have inclusion criteria, you selected the non-readers because they are the ones who can be an experimental participant of your intervention. And why only them? Because they are only the non-readers of your school. And that's it. So in purposive sampling, you need to have exclusion and inclusion criteria in order for it to be justified. Next is systematic sampling. So in the systematic sampling, before selecting the sample, the members of the accessible population are first organized in some sequence. For example, alphabetically. The action researcher then decides on a periodic interval to be used as guide in selecting participants. For example, he or she might decide to select every fifth name on the list of accessible population. The researcher can also randomly choose where to start counting. So an example for this is that if there are 50 students and the researcher only wants to involve 10 of them, then the interval will be 50 divided by 10 equals 5. So that's the interval. Therefore, the researcher will choose every fifth name on the list. So before choosing every fifth name, he should randomly select to start. So he should randomly select to start. For example, when he or she randomly selected to start with number 2, followed by number 7, 12, 17, and so on until 10 participants have been selected. Therefore, in systematic sampling, before you're going to apply the interval or periodic interval as guide in selecting participants, you need to have a random start. There should be a random start in order for the sampling procedure not to be subjective, and also to minimize sampling error. Next is accessible sampling. So accessible sampling, the sample consists of whoever is present or available or willing to participate in the action research or preliminary study. Actually, this is not a recommended kind of sampling procedure because the sample is not random. Therefore, may not fully represent the accessible population. There is some challenge to the researcher in terms of generalizing the problems and the findings, rather, to the population. For example, in this case, the researcher wants to conduct the study on how pets affect the performance of pupils in English, for example. So the researcher looked at her window and then saw a man or saw a kid having a dog, walking a dog. So she called him. So can you be my participant? And for action research, that is, for me, that is not a good practice, because once again, in a non-random sampling, you need to have an exclusion and inclusion criteria. Dapat clear siya ang imuhang nganong siya imong gipili, and justifiable siya in a way. Next is snowball sampling. Snowball sampling is also known as referral sampling. This type of sampling is usually applied for interviews conducted as preliminary study prior to an action research. The first interviewee is asked to refer another person who can be interviewed. In doing so, the researcher manages to put together the potential recipients of the intervention or treatment being planned. This snowball sampling is very appropriate, most especially if the participants of the study are not usual. Dili ka to silang dali makita. For example, is we want to study on the causes or reasons of drug addiction to the students here in Llano del Norte. So we cannot directly pinpoint that that student is a drug addict, diba? So we need to have first one student. We just only need to select one student who is or was a drug addict or addicted to drugs. So after that, the student will refer another person who can be interviewed, and that particular person will refer another person again, so on and so on. So in that way, you can have a justifiable number of participants in your study, despite the difficulty of finding the samples. So snowball sampling. So once again, why is it snowball? Diba? Daghan siya nangutana. Why is it snowball? Diba? Fishbowl, snowball. Why is it snowball? So when we talk about making a snowball, sa Amerika man guni siya nag-originate. So when we talk about the snowball, you cannot make a snowball directly. We need to pile snows. So gamay siya nga snow, so na pod pile until such mahimo na siyang snowball. So that's why it's called snowball sampling. We are going to pile first. Dapat maka-identify lang kag isa ka sample, and then mag-pile na dayon tong different samples. So that's the snowball sampling. Now we need to consider ethics also in the sampling procedure. In considering ethics, we need to have these two ethical considerations. First is the informed consent. So informed consent, prior to selecting and including any student as participant in an action research, one must first seek permission from the adults who have been entrusted with their care and protection. So this might mean asking parents or guardians to allow their wards to be part of the study, particularly when an intervention or treatment is to be applied or when sensitive information will be sought from or about them. So we need to inform the learners, and also we need to inform the parents. So naa siya informed consent ihatag sa learners, apoy parents consent ihatag sa parents. Next is that the permission of the principal or head of the school should also be required. An informed consent signed by the parent or guardian may suffice for research purposes. However, this might have to be sought way ahead of time before commencing the action research or preliminary study. Another thing also, if the participants of the study seek to stop, or shall we say, refuse the action research in the middle of the conduct of the action research, he or she might do so. Dili ka pwede makabot sa iya. For example, gusto niya muundang sa iyang action research, sa imong action research, ina siya ganahan, pwede. And also, if he or she has finished the action research, but then dili niya gusto ibutang iyang data dito, pwede po din siya. So you should include that in your informed consent, that they are free to back out anyone they want, anytime they want. So, ano siya. Next is right to privacy and confidentiality. What is the difference between the two? Privacy is for the participant, while confidentiality is for the data. So each student has a right to privacy. So any information about him or her, or any response obtained from or about him or her, must be kept confidential. The researcher may have secured their consent and permission prior to collecting the data from the students. However, this does not mean that he or she is at liberty to divulge that their identities and whatever data was elicited from them. All information must be kept in utmost confidentiality. And also, raw data must be kept under lock and key, and names of students must be replaced by code names or code numbers. It is the duty of the researcher to ensure that the privacy of each student is honored and maintained. So I guess that would end my discussion this day. So again, thank you for listening, and I hope you've learned a lot about sampling methods or procedures. Thank you and God bless.